Hello everyone. Well, I thought today for my first actual blog that I'd do a reading. That way I don't need to compose anything in my head, and I find I'm quite verbose when I'm not on camera, but when I am on camera, I clam up. I can't think of anything to say, so I'm going to let Dorothy Herrmann speak for me today. I found this chapter from a book she wrote titled S.J. Perelman, A Life. Everyone see that? I picked this up I think I picked it up from a used bookstore, maybe the Wee Book Inn in Calgary or something like that when I was visiting. This caught my eye in particular. Chapter 5 is titled Enter Groucho Marx. And the events in this chapter span from 1930 to 1932. S.J. Perelman in 1966 said, in essence, it was an experience no worse than playing the piano in a house of call. Over the years, Perelman's name has become inextricably linked with that of the Marx brothers. People who have never heard of him as a writer display a sudden interest when they are told that he wrote scripts for Harpo, Groucho, and Chico Marx. Some say that Groucho owed everything to Perelman, and that Perelman single-handedly created Groucho's comic persona. Perelman fans, attending a Marx Brothers film, tend to laugh and nod knowingly every time Groucho leers and makes one of his jaundiced wisecracks. Only Perelman, with his genius for non sequiturs, could have thought up a line like that. Sid should have been pleased by this adulation, but he never was. In fact, as time went on, he began to deplore and play down his connection with the Marx Brothers. In a sense, they had been his stepping stone to fame, but it was a fame he didn't care for. He felt that his work for the New Yorker and the plays he wrote for Broadway were far greater achievements. Besides, the assumption that he single-handedly created the style of 4 of the early major Marx Brothers films, Animal Crackers, Monkey Business, Horse Feathers, and Duck Soup, was untrue. He had worked on only 2, Monkey Business and Horse Feathers, and the scripts had been written in collaboration with other writers and the brothers themselves. In later years, when reporters asked him what it was like to work with the Marxes, he usually retorted that they were capricious and disorganized, as well as boorish, ungrateful, and megalomaniacal. Groucho was equally bitter about Perelman. In 1972, he told a reporter that Perelman could write a funny line, but never a script. When he was writing for us, he was writing with 4 other men. He thought he was the greatest writer in the world, and didn't want to be identified with comedians. Thought we were too low. After we became successful, he came out and said he wrote a great part of the Marx Brothers. This just wasn't true. We had good writers, but he wasn't one of them. At this point, Groucho interrupted his harangue and added sweetly, I had a dinner with him in England about 6 months ago. I don't think he's as funny anymore. It was not always so. In the early days of their relationship, Sid would often stay with Groucho in Hollywood, and when Groucho came to New York, which he did frequently, he would call up Perelman and have dinner with him. Sid gave Groucho a photograph of himself, which he inscribed, To Groucho, in memory of our many campaigns together in the Sudan. The 2 men corresponded, usually to compliment each other on some recent achievement. In his letters, Sid was fond of addressing Groucho as Cuddles. Groucho particularly liked Sid's Westward Ha, which was published in 1948, and wrote him a letter praising it highly. He was so enthusiastic about the book and accounted Perelman's journey around the world that he even wrote his family doctor telling him to buy a copy. Sid was touched by his old boss's enthusiasm. In a letter dated June 26, 1948, he replied, Dear Groucho, your letter was a kind deed in a naughty world, a phrase I copied out of Bartlett's book of quotations years ago and have been trying to work in ever since. It was particularly heartening since it arrived at one of those moments of self-laceration that freelance writers sometimes experience, never more than 8 hours a day, however. In these rare moods, the subject is given to regarding himself through the wrong end of a telescope and inquiring through his teeth, Too proud to stay in your father's dry goods business, eh? I told you that you'd rue the day. None of this, of course, would have happened had I actually stayed in my father's business, where my superb acumen would undoubtedly have made me the uncrowned king of the gingham trade. In the late 40s, when Sid was honored at a testimonial dinner in Beverly Hills, Groucho, who liked to make a reverent toast, introduced him with these words, Here is a man who has not let success go to his head, a man who is humble and unspoiled. He is as unassuming, as comfortable to be with as an old glove, and just about as interesting." In the same affectionate, bantering fashion, Sid retaliated in April of 1952 in a piece he wrote for Holiday, entitled "I'll Always Call You Schnorrer, My African Explorer." It described a visit to Hollywood where Groucho was filming A Girl in Every Port for RKO. In the piece, Sid twits Groucho about his legendary stinginess, relating how Groucho, instead of offering him a place to stay, suggests that he sleep in an old jalopy on a used car lot. When the two have lunch, there is much give and take about who will pick up the check, with Perelman having the last laugh a few days later at Romanoff's by signing Groucho's name to the bill after the comedian walks out, leaving Sid with the check. Groucho dedicated his 1959 autobiography, Groucho and Me, to these 6 masters, without whose wise and witty words my life would have been even duller: Robert Benchley, George S. Kaufman, Ring Lardner, S.J. Perelman, James Thurber, E.B. White. Sid's piece about the Marxes, The Winsome Foursome, published in Show in November of 1961, was far less flattering, but this did not seem to affect Groucho's feelings. As one who regularly insulted friend and foe, he was possibly thick-skinned about receiving insults from others. Brickbats were things he expected of his associates, especially if they were professional wits and had come of age in the 20s. Publicly, he continued to extol Sid's talents, commenting in Variety in 1964, "Women don't understand crazy humor, such as that of Perelman or Benchley, or even the early Marx Brothers. I think our earlier films were funnier than the later ones, but they didn't gross as much as those in which we dragged in a story and a love interest." 4 days after this piece appeared, Sid and Groucho met for lunch at the Connaught Hotel in London. It was not altogether a social occasion, for they were being interviewed by British critic Kenneth Tynan, who admired their work immensely. Side by side, when I entered the lobby, sat 2 middle-aged men with plenty of head visible through their hair, Tynan wrote. Both wore tweed suits and striped shirts with button-down collars. Both had toothbrush mustaches, of which Perelman's was straw-colored and upswept, while Groucho's was close-cropped and grey. At 60, Perelman is Groucho's junior by 9 years, and you notice at once that he defers to his elder as a performer. Similarly, Groucho defers to Perelman as an intellectual. They are both New Yorkers and Jewish. Perelman was born in Brooklyn, and Groucho on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The 2 men talked about Jewishness and the success of Jews in American show business. Perelman thought it was due to the fact that Jews were immigrants trying to master English, and that much of their humor derived from the mispronunciation of common expressions. Groucho disagreed. "You taught me that," he told Perelman, "but then I was trying to be an intellectual." Groucho felt that American comedy was not so much Jewish as urban, which made it appeal to Jews, the majority of whom lived in cities. The lunch was cordial. Sid and Groucho traded anecdotes about Fanny Brice, George Burns, and Gracie Allen, and reminisced about the West Side Writing and Asthma Club they had founded together in the 30s.